Takeshi, an A-list celebrity in two completely different ways. World-famous film director Takeshi Kitano and brilliant comedian Beat Takeshi. He keeps his finger on the pulse of art by having fun. Takeshi Art Beat. Today, Takeshi is in Tokyo's Ginza district. He has come to this shop to learn about Japanese swords.
Wow, this is nice.
The shop carries antique swords dating as far back as the 10th century, as well as contemporary pieces. Samurai once entrusted their lives to their swords. Today, swords may only be made for display.
The greatness of a Japanese sword is something uniquely Japanese.
This sword was made in the Kamakura period, around the 13th century. It was a time when many battles were fought, and many famous blades were produced. This weapon is more than 700 years old, but still gleams like new.
The middle Kamakura period was good?
Oh, the golden age of Japanese swordsmithing.
The best blades also look the coolest.
Functional beauty.
Like a pro boxer has the best body, or a competitive swimmer, they have the best bodies. And in the same way, swords meant for combat look the best.
Takeshi notices a sword made by perhaps the most acclaimed swordsmith alive today, Yoshindo Yoshihara.
Every swordsmith wants to make a sword like this, but
they can't.
No, they can't. You have to have the best materials, control the temperature just right, hammer it just the right number of times. Every step of the process requires consummate skill. Here.
Oh, this is dangerous.
Isn't it great? Look at the temper pattern. Like a bird's feather, that feathery edge.
The hamon, or temper pattern, is a white wavy pattern that results from changes in the steel during the forging process. It is a hallmark of Japanese sword making. Yoshindo is the only contemporary Japanese swordsmith whose work is held by art museums around the globe, including the Museum of Fine Arts Boston and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. To see Yoshindo's sword crafting skills in action, Takeshi pays a visit to his workshop in an old-fashioned part of Tokyo.
I hear something.
Following the sound, Takeshi arrives at the workshop, which is in a corner of Yoshindo's home.
Hello.
Hello. Glad you came.
Yoshindo Yoshihara is a swordsmith who breathes life into blades. He makes his swords using techniques that have not changed in 1,000 years. Now, he is going to demonstrate the process of turning a lump of steel into a beautiful blade. These plates are steel, the material of sword making. They have already been heated once. Carefully gauging the carbon content, he stacks these plates up in sufficient quantity to produce one sword. Before placing the steel plates in the furnace, he wraps them up in wetted Japanese mulberry paper. Then he coats this lump in straw ash and applies a clay slurry. Covering the steel like this blocks air from entering and oxidizing the surface of the steel. The coating also draws impurities out of the steel. Now begins the making of a kind of sword unrivaled in strength and beauty. Yoshindo raises the temperature in the furnace by blowing in air with a bellows. Using his left hand, he commands the temperature of the steel.
Do you always use the same kind of charcoal?
Yes, pine charcoal.
Does pine charcoal burn hot?
Pine charcoal is best for a strong fire. Then it doesn't throw off sparks or crackle. If you use poor charcoal, impurities will get into the steel because the temperature is so high. Hear that sound? Hear it?
The low simmering sound is the steel reaching its melting point.
I covered it with plenty of clay and ash, remember? That stuff is mixing with and dissolving away various impurities such as iron oxide, which is the blackish crust in the fissures of the steel. That's the sound you hear. It's steel being purified.
Yoshindo listens keenly to discern just the right time to remove the steel. The steel is being hammered to temper it. The steel is folded over as it is hammered. It is folded alternately, lengthwise and then widthwise, to create a many-layered structure. This tempering is essential to making a strong, beautiful Japanese sword.
You seem to be following a rhythm. Does that tell you something?
Mainly it's just a rhythm. But it does tell me where to hammer.
Oh, really?
That's how it goes.
You fold it and hammer it how many times?
We fold it 12 or 13, maybe 14 or 15 times.
Folded 15 times.
Yes.
And you can sense, just by looking at it, when it's enough?
Yes, you can sense it. Sometimes it feels right at 12 folds, sometimes it feels right at 13.
And sometimes it needs one extra.
Sometimes 14.
You judge by the strength of the flame, how it feels like on the hammer, stuff like that?
Right. When I make the first fold, I get a feel for how much the steel will yield. That's one of the factors in deciding what ends up being the right number of folds.
It sounds like all these things depend on experience and instinct.
It's all instinct.
The Yoshihara family have been swordsmiths in Tokyo for 3 generations. Yoshindo's grandfather was so skilled, he was called the Yokozuna, in reference to the highest rank in sumo wrestling. Yoshindo was born into swordsmithing. At age 22, Yoshindo was licensed as a swordsmith. Later, at the unheard of age of 39, he received the highest rank in sword making, Mukansa. Mukansa means without official judgment. This status is the calling card of a master swordsmith. It means that his or her swords are automatically recognized as masterpieces. The secret of both a Japanese sword's sharpness and its beauty is the sword's metal structure. The sword is composed of two different types of steel. One is relatively soft, the other is extremely hard. A Japanese sword has a layered structure, a soft steel core with a skin of harder steel around it. By using two steels with different properties, the Japanese sword gets its renowned qualities: unbreaking, unbending, sharp cutting. The most important element of a Japanese sword is the steel used to forge it.
This is raw steel, tamahagane, made from iron sand, the raw material of a sword. It looks like this.
It's really heavy.
This steel, called tamahagane, is created using an ancient Japanese method. It is made from iron that is 99% pure. This steel is produced in only one place in all of Japan. The so-called tatara iron-making process has been passed down for almost 2,500 years. High-quality iron sand is slowly melted in a charcoal-fired furnace for 3 days and 3 nights. It takes 13 tons of iron sand to produce just 1 ton of tamahagane steel. True Japanese swords can only be made from this extremely scarce steel. The 300 or so swordsmiths working in Japan today all make their swords using the steel produced here. Now Yoshindo will combine the two different steels.
Do they stick together in one piece?
Yes, that's right.
The soft steel is sandwiched into the hard steel, and the power of the flames brings them together.
Can you tell the temperature of the steel?
Yes, by the color.
Yoshindo monitors the color of the steel within the fire. When it glows white, the steel is hotter than 1,300 degrees Celsius. To make a sword, this extremely hot steel must be hammered out. Then the lump of steel is shaped into a sword.
You do it all with that one hammer?
That's right, just one hammer. One hammer to shape the sword.
Yoshindo uses neither blueprints nor molds. With a single hammer, he precisely shapes the sword from the blade's tang to its point. Already, the beauty of the sword's lines can be seen.
Both the line of the thick side and the line of the edge. At this stage of sword making, it's very important to hammer out sleek lines. It's how the lines ultimately come together. Now I'm going to show you how I applied the mud.
This workspace is inside Yoshindo's house. The steel has been hammered into the shape of a sword, but it still lacks a curve, and the surface of the metal remains rough. Now the blade will get its curve and its temper line.
So this is how it's done.
Yes. This is called blade clay, and it is made of ordinary clay mixed with charcoal ash and powdered whetstone. I colored this clay to make it easier to see, but this and the gray clay are basically the same. I lay this clay on thick so that the fire can't reach the steel. What the clay is really for is to regulate the rate of the temperature drop in the steel.
The finishing touch on a Japanese sword is the tempering. The blade is heated and then plunged into water to cool it quickly. Heating causes steel to expand. Where the clay is thickly applied, the expanded steel will cool more slowly and thus return to its original dimensions. Where the clay is applied thinly, the blade will cool quickly and the steel will remain at its expanded dimensions.
I figured the whole thing contracted. No?
No. Actually, it expands. That's what gives it the curve.
So it swells out to form the curve with the temper pattern spreading.
The other purpose of applying the blade clay is to make a pattern on the blade. Slight adjustments to the thickness of the clay create changes in the steel's makeup, which will in turn create a pattern. The temper line will follow the fine lines of clay Yoshindo has made. After the sword is quenched, the pattern will resemble clove buds. Takeshi will apply clay to a blade small enough that he doesn't need a swordsmith's license.
Like this. Just randomly, whatever shape you like. Lay it on like this and you'll get a nice pattern.
Just like this, he says. Oh boy.
You need to lay it on thicker, all over.
It's difficult to lay it on evenly.
It is difficult, yes.
I'm doing a pitiful job, aren't I? But it's amazing. Applying clay like this will cause the steel to change when it's tempered. That's interesting. This takes a whole different aesthetic sense.
It is difficult.
Producing a sword pattern isn't like other art. You have to have an eye for beauty. It can't just be any old wave pattern.
That's right.
Or you'll get something that's not quite right. It looks like a snake.
Will the clay applied by Takeshi produce a pattern at all? While the clay dries on their blades, Yoshindo shows Takeshi another room in his house.
I used to think those were oiled cloths.
But it's actually got a powder that absorbs oil.
I always thought blades were oiled.
But when it's oiled, you can't see the pattern. So the powder removes the oil.
Look how that sword gleams.
Yes.
That's why you want to use a real sword when shooting a close-up in a film.
Exactly.
Because you can tell when it's fake.
I always feel disappointed when I see those close-ups. Why do a close-up on a toy sword? I wish they would stop doing that. Here.
When I made the movie Zatoichi, they said use a real sword, but I said no way.
But isn't it beautiful?
Well, it is. This was forged from Tamahagane steel, right?
Of course.
It's incredible how the light plays on it.
There is nothing else that really shows you the character of steel like a sword does. There's no other way of appreciating the true quality of the metal. A sword lets you really appreciate the metal.
There's something spiritual in the Japanese sword.
Yes. Since the 16th century age of civil war, swords haven't really been used in combat, but they have retained an important spiritual meaning for many people.
That's why it has to be forged by one man working on one sword for several days. It can't be churned out by a factory. That's no good.
That's right. Because it's no longer a weapon. It's a symbol that gives people inner strength.
The tempering is done after nightfall.
This is the one I applied the blade clay to earlier. It's covered like this to make a blade with a clove bud temper pattern.
Oh, this is exciting. Is nighttime best for tempering?
Yes, tempering is done at night. It has to be dark.
Is there a reason for that?
Precise temperature control is essential to the tempering process.
You can tell more easily at night.
Well, across this narrow width of sword, I have to create a temperature difference of 30 to 50 degrees between the edge and the back. And that temperature difference has to be applied across the whole length of the sword. And the only way to distinguish the temperature is by color.
Whoa.
That's why we wait until dark, to better see the subtle changes in temperature through the color.
To temper the sword, the blade coated in clay is heated, then rapidly cooled in water. This alters the structure of the steel, hardening it. The sword grows redder and redder as it sits in the fire. This is the moment when the swordsmith breathes life into the sword. Yoshindo is creating the temperature difference across the 5-centimeter span of the blade. This temperature difference alters the molecular structure of the steel and produces the pattern. The edge of the blade at bottom is at 780 degrees Celsius. The back of the blade above is 730 degrees Celsius.
Only the edge is red.
If the swordsmith misjudges the temperature here, the sword will be ruined. Just another metal bar.
Did you see how just the edge got red because it was hotter there? Maybe you didn't.
I did see some red patterns. Oh, it's curved now.
Yes, a nice sweeping curve.
The sword is given a crude polishing to see whether the pattern came out as intended.
Can you see it?
Oh yeah, it came out. And the more you polish, the more it stands out?
Like the one I showed you.
All of this is the pattern?
Yes.
I see.
See that gorgeous line?
Oh, look there. This part is amazing. So rugged.
Yes, indeed. Now let's do this one.
I'm a bit embarrassed, you sure?
Now Yoshindo will temper Takeshi's knife.
If it heats up too red, the blade will be ruined.
All right.
Lights off, please. I'll pump the bellows gently.
Ready now?
Sure. It's your knife. You decide when it's ready.
I was scared I said something too soon.
No, it's going to be fine. There's a pattern on yours too. Once we polish it more, it will look nice. The irregularity of the line, it's surprisingly gentle. A man's true character comes out in the pattern.
My character, huh?
Yes.
Later, Yoshindo cuts Takeshi's signature into the knife and hones it. The pattern comes out wonderfully. A collaboration between Master Swordsmith Yoshindo Yoshihara and Beat Takeshi.
Forging a piece of steel is almost like some divine act of creation. Only Japan has this culture of being captivated by steel itself. Other countries have their decorations on their sabers and whatnot, but only in Japan is the naked blade itself so highly regarded. That's what really sets Japanese swords and Japanese swordsmiths apart, I think.
すごいね。へえ。